MJF, who is that?
Bret Hart just gave a wild interview.
Roddy was really the first guy to reach down and pull someone like me up to the next level. In contrast to guys like Jake Roberts and Hulk Hogan, who never passed the torch to anybody. Two of the biggest pieces of shit in wrestling.
But nothing more wild from that interview than when he said,
I think that Shawn and Vince were sleeping with each other.
Now, I know I've designated Mondays as Pro Wrestling Mondays on this channel, but I could not help but talk about what Bret Hart said on a podcast about Shawn Michaels and Vince McMahon over the weekend, where he basically alluded that they may have been lovers. Let's listen into some of what Bret Hart said on this interview first.
When Shawn, if you remember, forfeited the belt on Monday Night Raw and retired to go find his smile somewhere and forfeited the belt because of his knee injury. And I'm watching this and he does a standing backflip somersault off the top and lands right in the middle of the ring. Like when Shawn was in the ring talking about, he lost some part of himself or he was gonna go find his smile. I remember Vince had the tear roll down his cheek and I remember watching it and going, I think there's more going on here between these two guys.
Now, before we dive a little deeper into this, I do want to say that in the past, Bret Hart has been a very bitter man with the way his pro wrestling career went at the end, with it being cut so short, with the whole drama with the WWE. But Bret had a lot of reason to be bitter. I mean, his own brother dying because of the business. I've always, at that point, understood Bret Hart's bitterness. Now in 2010-ish, Bret Hart and Vince McMahon kind of buried the hatchet. Bret returned to the company and he worked on relationships. Even with Shawn Michaels, they seem to have a better relationship these days, which makes these comments all the more crazy. But what really made me personally laugh about these comments is I got my girlfriend to watch some classic Raws, and she's not a wrestling fan at all. She does not love wrestling. But I figured, she doesn't like modern wrestling. Maybe she would like some classic wrestling. So I went back to the years that made me a big fan, 1997, and we watched classic Raws from then. And the funny thing to me is that, first of all, to preface this, Shawn Michaels is her favorite wrestler from those years. When she watched some of those episodes, I would say Shawn was her favorite wrestler by far. She liked Stone Cold Steve Austin too, but I mean, who wouldn't like Stone Cold? But Shawn was her favorite. However, that being said, anytime Shawn and Vince McMahon had a in-ring interview, this was still during the days when Vince was an announcer and not an on-screen character, and he was still doing in-ring interviews. And those in-ring interviews with Shawn were always very elated, but also sometimes awkward. And my girl would always say, they're fucking. She would always constantly say that Vince and the Heartbreak Kid were fucking. And looking back on that now, after Bret comes out and says this, maybe that was a woman's intuition. Maybe it was. And I can't post some of those interviews here on YouTube because I don't want to deal with WWE's copyright for YouTube. I've dealt with that in the past. Don't really feel like dealing with that today. But if you go back and watch some in-ring interviews between Vince and Shawn during that time, there is this hint of awkwardness that is specific to when Vince is interviewing Shawn. But it's not only awkward, it's also Vince is always so elated with the Shawn Michaels character more than any other superstar he might be interviewing. Now, listening a little more here to what Bret said, he obviously could have been joking.
I think that Shawn and Vince were sleeping with each other. I'm just telling you, I think I'm very close to the truth here. I got caught between two lovers. And I got shafted and screwed over, and Shawn was so envious and jealous of my position that he finally had to sleep with Vince to get it. And I tell you, I say all this with absolute. I would say it to Shawn if he was right here. I would actually like to have Shawn come clean and say, look, we were lovers. Because I'm sure they were.
Despite him constantly saying, seriously though, I mean this, he still could have been joking. But you never really know with Bret. I feel like Bret has gotten to the point where he just says whatever the hell he wants to say about pro wrestling. Whether it's modern pro wrestling, whether it's the people he used to work with. He's going to tell it like he sees it. And I respect that from him. The only other thing I want to say about all of this is, do I really think they were lovers? I mean, I would like to think Bret was being comical to that whole situation. But Vince McMahon and Shawn Michaels' working relationship always is talked about being so very different than anyone else's. You can listen to Jim Cornette talk about it. At one point, I don't know if I could find the video to edit into this video, but if I do, I will. But Vince Russo, who was a writer at the time, I don't think he was the head writer quite yet in 1997 when most of this was taking place, but he was still on the writing team. But he always talks about how he had to be the in-between for Vince and Shawn. But he always mentions how he never saw any other wrestler talk to Vince McMahon the way Shawn Michaels talked to Vince McMahon. And so my question, even back then, was always like, why does Shawn Michaels get away with what he gets away with? Now, the obvious reasoning would be, well, this was during a time when WCW was really kicking the WWF's ass in the ratings. Nitro was stomping on Raw back then, and Vince was losing all his top stars to WCW, and maybe he just really, really wanted to hang on to Shawn Michaels. Now, a detractor from that argument was that during this time, Shawn was always doing something to get out of doing the job, losing his smile, faking an injury to be worse than it actually was. That's what Bret Hart is talking about in this video, is the tear in Vince McMahon's eye when Shawn might have to never wrestle again because of his leg injury, but at that same time, Shawn is doing backflips off of the turnbuckles. So it's all a very strange situation back then. I have always wondered why Vince let Shawn get away with what he got away with. Shawn was obviously in some bad places back then. And it's easy these days, like my girl, to talk about Vince McMahon in this way because we all know that he is such a sexual deviant now. All of that has came to light from his lawsuits against him, from text messages he was involved in. Vince McMahon was a sexual deviant. Did he have his own Me Too movement with some of the male stars on his roster? You can't put it past him because he was a sexual deviant. Some of the things he said in text messages over the years that came out, creepy. So wouldn't put that past Vince McMahon. But I've always liked Shawn Michaels. I don't want to put this on Shawn Michaels in a bad way. He is one of the best to ever do it. I mean, to me, I do think it helps that Shawn Michaels had such a bigger, lengthy career than Bret. If Bret could have had a late career, he really could have had some great feuds in the WWE potentially. But Shawn did get a chance to have that, and it really cemented him as one of the best to ever do it. But there's just something about mid to late 90s Shawn Michaels that it always makes me wonder how he got away from being possibly the biggest diva in WWE history. I mean, Triple H might have beat him at one point because Triple H married the boss's daughter and could get away with whatever he wanted. But Shawn wasn't married to the boss's daughter. So why did Shawn have that dramatic relationship with Vince McMahon, where Vince let him be this huge diva? Were they lovers? I don't know. You'd have to ask them. But according to Bret Hart, it's potentially a possibility.